Well, hello everybody and happy Friday from the Hispano Chamber of Commerce, and welcome to the final day of our webinar series this month, hosted by our partners and our friends at New Mexico Mutual. So we're excited. We have a fun topic for you guys today. So we're excited to see what is happening out in the world of cannabis, and we have a lot to talk about. But before we get started, a little bit of housekeeping. Again, I want to do a big shout out to our partner, New Mexico Mutual, who has supported this venture the entire month long. They are friends of the chamber, members of the chamber, partners of the chamber, and without partners such as New Mexico Mutual, these types of webinars and outreach to the community cannot be brought to you. So please, again, just a shout out and hands together for New Mexico Mutual. I also want to thank, I like to call them our little elves behind the screens, because you will never see their faces unless you happen to be one of the lucky ones, but they do exist. Our little elves at New Mexico Tech, Shay and Dylan are with us today, and I'll tell you, New Mexico Tech has been an incredible partner for the last 2 months of series, and Monday we start our new series with Comcast, and we're super excited to have New Mexico Mutual as that tech partner. I also want to thank Angelique. She's behind the scenes as well, making sure that Facebook is smooth, and also getting us your questions live on Facebook. So I want to remind you guys that we're going to continue the webinar series. It has been a huge success here for the community and the membership at the Hispano Chamber, and we're very, very thankful to you guys in your outreach. Thank you for your surveys. Thank you for responding to us and letting us know what's important to you and what is the information that you need to move forward, whether it's reopening your business or regrowing your business. And so we definitely love hearing from you guys. And so with that being said, we have a lot of new initiatives coming up in June, and we're going to talk about that at the end of the webinar today. But we're excited to just jump into this one, full wings. Let's just go right in, because this is a topic that a lot of people have asked about. We have had the opportunity to have one in-person workshop, if you will, with New Mexico Mutual a little while back on the importance of cannabis in the workplace and what it is that employees need to know. So in order to get started, I'd love to introduce our panel today, but I'm going to let them tell you a little bit about themselves. So Grant, if we could start with you joining us live from Colorado, please share a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Yes, thank you very much. From the Rocky Mountain, much higher Colorado. We've had both recreational and medical over you guys so far, but I know you guys are working your way towards recreational. But I'm a staff attorney at Pinnacle Assurance. We are the primary work comp carrier for the state of Colorado. Been around since the inception of the Work Comp Act in 1915. And I've been with the company either in-house or out-house, working for a dedicated firm for the last 23 of my 28 years of practicing law. So the majority of my career has been representing employers and protecting their employees with the help of pricing claims and managing, pricing policies and managing claims. And so obviously versed in this topic area, and look forward to talking to folks today about it.
Great, thank you, Grant. And then moving over to my left side, we have Dan from New Mexico Mutual. Dan, please share with us a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Dan Girolamo, the Vice President of Claims for New Mexico Mutual. I've been with the company now for 26 years, spent that entire time in the claims department, started out of college as an adjuster trainee and been doing that ever since. New Mexico Mutual has been around since 1991. We were created by state action in 91 as a state fund. We just do workers' compensation business, and we just do it here in the state of New Mexico. We're the largest provider by far in the state of workers' compensation insurance. We have about 32% of the voluntary workers' compensation market. So this is what we do. It's our specialty, and the medical marijuana issue is becoming a bigger issue for us, just as it is for you. So I'm happy to be here to talk to you about it today.
Well, thank you both for being here. We appreciate you guys. You know, we did search high and low to make sure we had experts in the field. And so I think it's really great that the viewing audience knows a little bit about your background and understanding the importance of the information they're going to hear today. Because of course, the regular questions, and let's just start with addressing them right away, which is, what is it that an employer needs to know? I want to talk about employees too, but let's start with the employer. What is it that the employer needs to know? We can be specific as you guys want to be. What happens if an employee comes to work and they have the appearance of being, high, or they've used medical marijuana? So let's talk about those distinctions between what they can and cannot do, and how they approach their employees.
Who do you want to start?
Up to you, Dan. If if you want to set out a New Mexico framework, and I can complement that, or I can tell you what we do in Colorado.
Sure. So from my perspective, in the state of New Mexico, for employers, the cannabis issue sort of has three impacts. The first impact is you have a workplace injury with someone who is intoxicated, either through drugs or alcohol. And the big question is that claim covered? And the short answer to that is that yes, it is covered. You may be able to reduce indemnity benefits a little bit, depending upon the evidence that the drug use or intoxication actually contributed to the workplace accident, which is a pretty impossible standard. I've actually never seen it accomplished. And so in all practical purposes, when a worker is hurt at work and they do have a positive drug screen, you are still liable for the workers' compensation benefits. The second impact is you have somebody who's taking cannabis for a work injury that you're covering, and they want to come back to work. Do you have to bring them back to work or not? And the answer to that is it depends on your company policy about tolerance of drugs in the workplace. You're going to stay liable for the indemnity benefits on the work comp side until you make a job offer. But if you have a policy that's a drug-free workplace, then you probably should not make a job offer and bring them back to work. But if your policy does permit that sort of activity, then it probably is a good idea to try to bring them back to work to mitigate the cost of the comp case. And then the third impact is you have somebody on cannabis for a work injury, and then they go on medical cannabis and they relate it to the work injury, and they ask the employer to reimburse for their cannabis use. And here in New Mexico, we happen to be the first state in the country that was something that we should do. There's 3 cases that went to our Court of Appeals starting in 2015 that found that the answer to that question is yes, employers and insurance carriers should reimburse injured workers for medical cannabis use. There are some qualifiers. They have to be registered with the Department of Health, and they have to have a medical cannabis card, and they have to have a qualifying condition. There's 28 qualifying conditions with the Department of Health, but a couple of them pertain very closely to workers' compensation injuries, PTSD, and the other one being chronic pain. We see those 2 diagnoses a lot in workers' compensation claims, and those are 2 qualifying conditions for a medical cannabis card with the Department of Health. And then if they have a certified card from the Department of Health, then the authorized physician has to relate the cannabis use to the injury and has to certify that all other treatment methods have failed. And if those things are in place, then they do qualify for reimbursement. The state here has a fee schedule for it, $12.02 per dry gram or per unit, and a unit is equal to 1 dry gram of cannabis. Department of Health allows a person to use 230 units in a rolling quarter. So if you take the fee schedule and apply that to the maximum allowable by the Department of Health, it comes out to about $11,000 a year that you could potentially reimburse a worker for cannabis use. Now, I've never seen that. I've never seen somebody max out on that. That's an awful lot of cannabis. And in fact, we haven't even seen all that many requests yet to reimburse cannabis use for a work injury. We have seen some, it's increasing. There's more than 80,000 people now that are qualified through the Department of Health for a medical cannabis card. So this continues to grow. I think, we'll see more and more requests. And then if the state of New Mexico establishes cannabis for recreational use, which we all think is coming in the next year or two, then I think that's going to have some impact on that as well. So those are my comments.
Yeah, and dovetailing on some of that, we've got this, in Colorado, we couldn't deny a claim if an injured worker had a post-injury drug screen. There are states out there, Arkansas and a couple others, that you can actually, and I think Ohio, you can actually deny the work injury if a test came back positive. So we have a similar system where you'll get full medical care if it's work related, but we can reduce the benefits in half for that post-accident drug screen, or we can deny all temporary indemnity if the employer had a drug policy that resulted in the termination of the injured worker. We can rely on that to not pay those benefits. Run into some of the same challenges with return to work and modified duty while the injured worker is recovering and on temporary restrictions. And we advise our clients, to look in today's world, in the world of marijuana, to carefully look at their drug policy. Certainly safety sensitive positions, cops, cranes, things of that nature, zero tolerance has to be imposed. And if you're tied to the Department of Transportation, you're going to be stuck with the zero tolerance. But we have other industries, restaurants, ski, and clerical work that employers can look at more progressive or only have a random. Since we've had recreational marijuana, employers have dropped about 10% on post-injury drug screening. And are relying more on actual observation if they're concerned about it, and not just having that. The other challenge in Colorado, of course, with recreational is on the front end, even before Dan's company or my company get involved in the hiring practice. It's very difficult to find employees who can pass the pre-employment drug screen, and so those are big challenges. And really, for us, we're not authorized to pay for medical marijuana. When we introduced it back in 2000, it's really silent to work comp, but there's nothing that authorizes us to pay. Although I think some of the rationale in the New Mexico decisions and a recent Maine decision would suggest that we were heading in that direction. And in fact, our director of the Department of Work Comp would like to explore the medical efficacy of marijuana because of more recently the opioid epidemic. I was looking at the number and saying, gosh, that's a lot of marijuana for $11,000, but relative to what we're paying for opioids, if it's an effective medical modality, I think Colorado's behind New Mexico on this, but I think we're going to eventually be in that same spot. Our medical treatment guidelines say that they can't recommend the use because there's no evidence-based medicine about its use and how it correlates with other medications, because it's been a Schedule I drug since 1937, when it was banned in 37, and then of course we work our way up to the 1970s Controlled Substance Act. As a Schedule I drug, there's no known medical use, and so there really hasn't been a lot of research like with so many other forms of drugs and medications. So we're not paying for it, but in my universe where people are suffering also from chronic pain, that seems to be the primary basis for the need and use of it. we look at strategies sometimes in cases that are never, where an injured worker is never going to go back to work, that there's a strategy where if medical marijuana actually works and you can reduce the injured worker's dependence on narcotics, when you're faced with doing a Medicare set-aside account and have to run that by the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, you could significantly reduce your liability as a carrier, and hopefully provide something that the injured worker believes is a benefit.
So I have to tell you guys, that's a lot of great information. I was taking notes, but we also have some questions coming in. I kind of just want to dive into some of these questions, and I'll pose them to both of you. And whoever wants to answer, you both want to answer, it's fine. Again, not knowing all the expertise and all the backgrounds, but these are some really great questions. So one of the questions is, are employers even allowed to drug test anymore? If so, is it for specific industries? If not, is there a list out there where if it's something you can or cannot do? Of course, employers are not wanting to break any rules, but again, just beginning to understand how to work with the cannabis.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the answer is yes, you can drug test, but it's also dependent upon your company policy. If you're going to drug test, I highly recommend you have a policy. You distribute the policy to your entire staff. You follow the policy. Think about what your plan is. So if you have a positive test, what are you going to do about that? And then apply the policy consistently for your entire staff. Don't make exceptions. And that's why it's important to think about what your plan is and then write the policy and get advice. Have an attorney help you draft that policy. But yes, you can drug test it. The workers' compensation statute in New Mexico, the law around intoxication defense, part of your defense, if you're trying to reduce indemnity, you would need a positive drug test to even get started. And you would also need to have a written policy in place and distributed to your entire workforce to even try to reduce benefits.
Yeah, very similar in Colorado as well. We have built into our statute the right to take those reductions, so it's presumed that there's a right to take a post-accident drug screen. Other employers look to whether they want pre-employment, whether they want random. But a lot of our employers really kind of zero in on the safety sensitive nature of the occupation and the duties as to how aggressive they want to be with that policy. But consistency is king. You got to apply it to the person that's been there for a week as you do to old guys like me and Dan who've been around probably too long. And that's where employers can get in trouble. The other part is be careful what you want to know. It's a confidential registry in Colorado. You don't have to tell anybody that you're on the medical marijuana registry, but oftentimes injured workers do divulge that, and they'll divulge it to their employer. And while you don't have to accommodate the use of the marijuana, what you may learn is that they've got some underlying medical condition that you do have to accommodate or make reasonable accommodation for under ADA or other laws that may be applicable in your region. So, you want to be careful what you want to know and don't want to know. Obviously, when you're dealing with external customers, you want to make sure your folks are safe. But I think it's important to get with an attorney once you kind of, and it is okay to say, I'm going to always subject my drivers to regular random and a higher threshold of testing than you do your clerical, as long as there's a basis and a rationale for why you're treating classes of employees differently. You don't have to have a one size fits all for your entire staff. You just have to have something that makes sense and is rational. And if you're subject to OSHA, you got to make sure that your policy doesn't appear to be a punitive policy that would cause people not to report injuries. OSHA has been very clear that they will go after employers who they think are using drug screening as a basis to avoid the reporting of injuries.
Okay, so that actually brings up a whole lot more. I'm trying to condense some of these questions into, because they're asked in a couple of different ways, but I want to talk a little bit about those two last statements that you both gave. So, the original question was, how do employers go about drug testing now? Can they? And we led into policy. So it really seems at this point that it's on the shoulders of the employer to put a policy in place. Now, here's the question that is the big question. If it is disclosed, if your employee comes to you and they disclose that they use it recreationally or medically, and at this point, I think employers don't know if there's a difference or not, if they need to know that difference. But if they are using it in any such way, does the employer have to keep the employee? If it's something that maybe they don't yet have a policy in place because they've not had to address it. So here becomes now an employer that gets approached for the first time with an employee that says, yeah, I use marijuana on the weekends, or I have a chronic pain concern and I use it. And so now the employer is faced with, I got to put a policy in place. And so I think the question, if I understand correctly, is do they have to keep the employee? What is the ramifications? And, or should they keep the employee and start to develop this policy? Like which way do they go? I know.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, and as a lawyer, it's always like, well, you'll handle that on a case by case basis. And, a shout out to my peers, talk to a lawyer. In Colorado, we have employment at will. Very few collective bargaining agreements or impediments to keeping labor. So if you've got someone you just don't like and you found out that they smoke marijuana and you don't want them around and you're convinced that it's recreational and not to treat a medical condition, I think you can let it, under employment at will on its most basic level, you can let somebody go. I wouldn't use that excuse. I might say I'm downsizing my labor force, but there's, in employment at will, both the employee and or the employer can pretty much walk away. The concern you've got is if they are using it for a medical condition and that gets sort of vetted out, you may be running into if you're subject to ADA or making reasonable accommodation, or you could be subject to a wrongful termination suit that they think you're an anti-discriminatory action by the employer. So it could be perilous depending on what the facts are of the specific incident.
So
I would agree with that. I would echo that. And I think that if a worker has qualified for a medical cannabis card with the state, they do have certain protections. You need to understand what those protections are.
Yeah. Thank you, Dan, for that point. Because you guys don't have recreational. So it could go either way here. In your universe, there is a underlying medical condition you may or may not want to know about.
Yeah.
So I think, again, by no means am I an expert in the legal side of this whatsoever, but I think what I'm understanding is that the best thing that an employer could do is put together a policy by consulting their local, like a New Mexico Mutual, your local company, or your attorney. And once you put that policy in place, if that policy then is that you don't allow it, well, then that's when you start to address those case-by-case issues. And I think that's kind of what I'm understanding a little bit.
Yeah,
that's my biggest recommendation, is to have a policy, distribute it to your employees, apply it consistently and evenly to all your employees. It's your biggest protection. You do have a right to have a drug-free workplace.
Absolutely.
Still recognizes if that's what you want to do, you can do that. But you want to establish policies stating that in order to best protect yourself. And yes, consult with an attorney all the time.
Yeah.
So that question
and certain things that we just add on, just to dovetail on that, is to avoid the use of the term illegal drugs in a policy, because the confusion would be that it is technically legal under New Mexico law versus federal law. And we recommend including marijuana expressly in the document, so it's unambiguous that we all know what we're talking about.
Don't be afraid of the word is
right.
what we're talking about here. What you did. Don't be afraid of the term. So, I mean, I think that kind of addresses the next question. But I think to add to that, where okay, let's say that they don't have a company like New Mexico Mutual, or let's say they don't necessarily have an attorney. Are you guys aware of any website or place that the state might have where they can go to find some of these questions to these answers, especially when putting a policy together? So, or do we say, hey, you got to get with your insurance and you got to get with your attorney? I mean, I'm not sure that there's one. So I think that's why we're reaching out, if you guys know if the state has anything put together.
I'm not aware of anything, and I think your best plan of action is to consult with an attorney who specializes in this.
Yeah, we have an entity called, used to be Mountain States, but now it's Employers Council here in Denver that assists employers. And so there might be resources, but you could probably do a Google search for sample drug policies, or find your way, navigate into something along those lines. But yeah, the resources are out there. But yeah, ultimately, you'll want to tailor it down to the specific needs of your company, and it would be very important to have your lawyer review it and make sure that all the appropriate legal terminology and all the T's are crossed and I's are dotted.
So the next question that I have, and it's something that we've recently talked about with you guys just a little bit ago, but also it was brought up that there is 28 qualifying conditions that allow somebody to qualify for a medical marijuana license. Now, I know that's in New Mexico. I understand that. Is there a place that they can go to find those qualifying conditions? Again, looking for a website or information, or should we refer them to their insurance company, their attorney? How would we address that?
So you can find the qualifying conditions on the New Mexico Department of Health website. There's a number of links on that website, and one of them will take you straight to the qualifying conditions that the state has approved. They have a medical advisory board that meets twice a year, and they add to that list each year, so that the list has grown. Over the last several years. It's currently at 28. I just checked this morning. It's at 28 qualifying conditions. But they can get that on the Department of Health website.
Okay, thank you for that. So then that leads to the next question, which is, can an employer ask a potential employee during an interview if they use medical marijuana, or in the case of Colorado, recreational? What is it that they can ask during that interview legally that you're aware of?
Well, I'm not clear on New Mexico, so I wouldn't want to provide advice for New Mexico. But in Colorado, you have the ability to inquire about prior medical once an offer is made. So pre-employment, post-offer, you can have a physical exam done, a drug screen done, and so that information can come out at that point, that whether they're fit for duty, fit for the position. And so a lot of our employers choose to still do the pre-employment drug screen, which will vet out that information without even having to ask. But in Colorado, you can't ask someone if they're on the registry. It's a confidential registry, or you can ask them, they just don't have to tell you.
And as to New Mexico, I don't know the answer.
I'll talk to you after the webinar.
Yeah, I'm not an attorney, and that's out the area of expertise. That's employment law, and I don't know the specific answer to that here in New Mexico.
Which actually leads to, the other question that we probably can answer, which is it a problem if you don't hire them based on that? And if they admit to, recreational use, I think more of what I'm understanding from some of the questions that are coming in is, it's a different world that we live in now, and people feel freer to talk about that inside of an interview. They're not afraid to admit that they use it, whether it's in the case of New Mexico medical licensed reasons, or if it is, they happen to be okay with the recreational. But I think the question is more, how do employers handle that? How do employers tackle that question? Or are they, should they even ask if they do have a policy that is absolutely no drugs? Maybe that's said in the interview. So I think that's the type of question we're trying to get the answer.
I think what we have to zero back in on is what matters is what they're doing or their state of mind and their condition when they're on the job. There are protections for employees outside of work. I'm sure New Mexico's got a similar statute that an employer doesn't need to concern itself with lawful activity being done by an employee outside of work. That was tested in Colorado, where Dish Network hired a paraplegic to be kind of like a door greeter, and he was subject to their random drug screen. And as soon as he tested positive, he said, "Hey, I've got my medical card." And as I always analogize, a medical marijuana card is just basically a get out of jail free card. It doesn't keep your job. It doesn't entitle you to a whole lot. But Mr. Coates thought it would keep his job. It went all the way up to the Colorado Supreme Court. And the Colorado Supreme Court held that, that your lawful activity at the state level isn't lawful at the federal level. And they ruled that Mr. Coates' constitutional right to marijuana was not greater than the employer's constitutional right to have a drug-free, safe work environment. So I think it's important to keep the scope of what your concern is to what your employees are doing while they're on the clock. What they're doing outside of work, to the extent you need that information, make sure it's very clearly tailored to the duties or the assignment so that you're not overstepping your bounds.
So it's a lot like, you come in on a Monday morning, everybody talks about what they did over the weekend. Oh, they were drinking and they went out and they, did this and that and they partied or whatever their terminology is. And right now that's not a common occurrence in the workplace when it comes to cannabis, but it'll get to that. And so I think that's why some of the, the employers right now are thinking, oh my gosh, this is becoming a reality. And how do we put the right checks and balances in place? And because it's not, common, if you will, right now. I think that's the scary part of employers right now, business owners going, I want a drug-free environment, but maybe again, just not knowing. And so those are some of them.
Yeah. And it's, and the problem is we don't have the testing to where it needs to be to truly show impairment. When you subject someone to a urine test, you're just confirming that in the last 7 days or so that they had THC in their system. It's inactive. So there's no psychotropic component to the positive testing. It's already been through their system. Blood and saliva are a little bit better of being more contemporaneous with the use. But there's no good evidence to suggest that marijuana impairment lasts more than a couple hours to 24 hours. So certainly if you saw a post on a Saturday that your employees forgot to invite you to a great party, and by their definition, I think it's better to train your supervisors in identifying symptoms of impairment, bloodshot eyes, and there's a whole protocol for that, and there's training for that that would make more sense than to be super concerned about what someone did on a Saturday. But to your point, Shannon, it's amazing how much less surveillance we have to do today because of social media and all the injured workers who go into the doctor's office and say they can't do this or that, and then post on their web pages and all across social media all these other things they can do.
Well, social media gets us in trouble anyway. So it can be cannabis. It can be, somebody on an airplane doing, again, it becomes an issue of like, use your best judgment. You're representing your company even when you're not. And so it's one of those things that you got to kind of use your noggin a little bit and say, is this a good idea to put out there?
Right.
those are some of the funny things that we hear about when we're watching TV and social media going, why would they do that? And this is the same kind of concept. Right now you have some people that are very okay with it and free with it. And then you have the others, which are the business owners going, wait, hold on, we don't know enough about it and we just don't want to deal with it. But the news is you got to deal with it. So it sounds like get yourself a good insurance company, an agent that you can work with, and find yourself a darn good attorney.
Yeah, if your employee is going to be up on a ladder first thing in the morning, then it's probably pretty important that you know what state of mind is. If the worst thing that they're going to get is a paper or a stapler cut in the course of a day, then maybe you're less concerned.
And that's my comment too, that for employers that have higher risk jobs within their company, they need to pay more attention to that, and they draft their policies to address those concerns. I think the grant mentioned this before, but they can have a hybrid policy where, perhaps there's more tolerance in certain positions and less tolerance in these high risk positions. Because they are going to be liable. If there's a workplace accident, even if somebody's impaired, they're going to be liable for the costs of that claim. So, the higher risk, those kind of occupations cause more concern for me. And I wonder how that's going to be impacted if we get cannabis legalized recreationally. That's going to impact the workplace. I don't know. And maybe Greg can talk to that from.
We haven't, since, when Amendment 64 passed in 2014, we were having our heyday with medical marijuana. We had over 100,000 people on the registry at that point, and but recreational certainly has expanded its accessibility. But there's been state reports that they're not seeing an increase in juvenile use. We're not seeing an increase in work-related accidents and or an increase or spike in post-accident drug screens. They remain pretty consistent. So we had the same kind of anxiety. We're 6 years into it now, so I think we're feeling a little more settled into it.
Sure.
And we insure the industry as well, because not many other carriers want to provide coverage for marijuana grow.
Trying to unmute. I forget. You got to unmute before you start talking. We're on top of everything else we're learning. We're learning technology over the last 3 months. So you can hit your space bar sometimes, but sometimes you hit it and it doesn't unmute. So anyways, that's kind of funny. But so, there's something here that we've been partnering with New Mexico Mutual, and I think it's a good time to kind of bring it up. And Dan probably knows a little bit more about this than I do. But I know that we have been working on creating I guess, let me make sure that I get the terminology correctly, but I guess we would call it like a FAQ, a frequently asked questions guide, some information. So Dan, I'm gonna let you talk about that a little bit, and I'm gonna search really quick and see if I can pull that up on our website and share that link with everybody.
Yeah, we did put together a fact sheet subsequent to the live session we had. I think it was in January of this year, and that went through our in-house legal counsel, and we're trying to provide some general advice about some of these same questions. So if you have a chance to grab that document off the Hispano Chamber website, is that where it is, Shannon? Then I encourage you to do that. It may provide a little bit more in-depth answer from some attorneys' perspectives that may guide you through some of these complicated questions.
So I think we'll make 2 points on that. We will probably attach that link somewhere in this post for anybody that goes back and watches it in the future. We'll pull it off our website. But for everybody that's out there, our website is www.ah cnm.org, and you'll be able to go in and find that FAQ, that booklet, those questions. And I think a lot of the questions that were asked today are probably addressed in there. Like I said, I am not an expert by any means in any legalities, but we're learning together. To all you business owners out there in Facebook land and who may be watching in the future, it is a very real thing. And so together with the Hispano Chamber, we will work with you when you have questions that are maybe you don't have an answer to in the FAQs, or we don't have an answer to, because of our partnership with New Mexico Mutual. I think we can help you there. And I also want to point out that we have just translated that FAQ into Spanish. So I think that that's going to be really important in helping to get that out to the Spanish-speaking business owners out there to be able to support what they need to know in their workforce and hiring and how they handle staff moving forward. So thank you to Tessa Latson and her team, Paco Reyes out in our BEOC, our Barelas Economic Opportunity Center, who work closely with New Mexico Mutual and really help with our programs here at the Chamber. And we just find it's an important topic. And so here we go. Thank you so much, Angelique. She's looking that up, but you can find this on our page. And we'll make sure, like I said, and put that link out there for everybody to see and view, get some of those questions answered that maybe you need to read a little bit more about. So again, thank you to Dan and New Mexico Mutual for helping us with that. So while they're looking at that booklet there, I'd like to ask you guys, so the last few months have been challenging, of course, across the world, but especially in our United States here. And so have you guys seen anything positive or negative around the medical marijuana licensing when it comes to what's been happening with COVID? Has it affected it at all? Does it even matter? Has there been any increase, anything along those lines?
Yeah, from my perspective, no, I haven't seen any impact, up or down, no changes. I mentioned a bit earlier, we have not seen a whole lot of requests for reimbursement of cannabis anyway. And so that has remained relatively stagnant. And I haven't seen any new claims reported with intoxication use alleged. So I've really seen no impact from COVID on the medical marijuana, at least as it interacts with the workers' compensation system here in New Mexico.
Yeah, and that's true here in Colorado. We had to move to telemed for some of our providers and those challenges, but our state left the dispensaries open for medical marijuana patients to obtain their marijuana medicine. So yeah, we haven't seen that really have any change other than, for us, just trying to get people in to see doctors and get the care they need because of the crisis and having to do, like I said, more telemed type appointments.
So Grant, before we move on and start to close up and get some final thoughts out there, one of the questions that has been asked, and I think it's a kind of a general question, but I'm not sure how far in depth you can get into it with us. But Colorado does have the ability to have recreational use, obviously, with the dispensaries, and so I think the thought is, do you have any words that you could share about any positive or negatives regarding marijuana being legalized in Colorado? And I think the question is because of the fact that New Mexico is probably moving in that direction.
Yeah.
I think there's just some questions about what's happening in other states.
Well, I think it's good for me to hear that because you take me back to 2012 and 2013 when we knew our freight train of recreational was coming, and we had all that same level of anxiety, level of concerns. How are our employers going to manage and maintain drug-free workplaces, the safety of their employees, the safety of third parties to the extent that their businesses interact? And we had, sitting here today, it takes me back to how we felt. I hope for you that that whatever happened here happens there, that it really doesn't have a significant impact other than forcing folks to have that conversation. In today's world, marijuana is not going away. That ship has sailed. It's going to take the feds a while to get the banking figured out, to possibly declassify it from Schedule 1. But it's here. And so it's just something that employers are going to have to manage from the scope of where they need to manage it. And so it's a good opportunity, if you haven't looked at your drug policy in a number of years, to go back and revisit it and ask yourself, why do I need it at this level, or what do I need? How do I develop a program that's good for my employees, my customers, and my peace of mind?
Well, you know, Grant, here in New Mexico, we're barely getting used to CBD. So cannabis is for us so far. It's funny, but it's truthful, because, you know, we're employers, business owners are now really starting to go, oh, wow, this is really happening. Because it's been a conversation that's been happening for years. It's not necessarily a new conversation, but it's starting to happen in, more frequently. And now they're engaging with more questions, hence the reach out in partnership with New Mexico Mutual, because it just is such an important part of every day. You have businesses coming into the chamber wanting to start new businesses. You know, it's getting that word out early.
Yeah, I think the biggest hurdle isn't in the work comp arena, isn't in so much even the safety. It's in the hiring, on the front end. That is probably the most significant challenge in Colorado is the pre-employment testing, because folks are doing it with more frequency or have more accessibility. Looking at modifying how you handle that, and apparently there are ways to increase the threshold for a positive on a marijuana test. So that may be something that you consult with the lab that you're using. Detect and or remove it. Some of our employers have simply removed marijuana from the panel of testing. So there are a variety of strategies, but I think that's been the most difficult one. And again, it's whoever can figure out how to figure out impairment like we do with alcohol is going to be a billionaire, but also going to be thanked by so many.
That's awesome. I love that. So before we move out, we didn't really touch too much. I know that our focus is the business owner, and I know that our focus is the employer and what we can do to support the employer in most of our backgrounds and what we do. But do you have any advice for employees and how they should be handling, whether it's conversations with their employer, whether it's, the right way to react with other coworkers? Do they tattletale? What's any advice that you have for an employee that you could share? Just one word of advice.
And you got that? Mine would be,
not disrupt the panel.
mine would be stay in your lane unless there is a threat to yourself or to others. Gossip rarely gets in, and secondhand information, relying on a non-expert to tell you that someone's impaired. I think as an employee, be honest about your physical capabilities. You don't have to disclose all prior conditions, but don't go out there jackhammering if you've got a terrible spine. And with regard to the use of marijuana, I'll defer to Dan on if there's any obligations an employee has to disclose that.
Yeah, I'm not aware of any, and again, that's outside my area of expertise, so I wouldn't want to give any advice on that. But I would echo the same thing that Grant said. We've made a lot of gains in workplace safety over the last several decades. It's really improved safety. It's reduced fatalities in the workplace. It's led to a significant increase in our claim frequency rates. And so it's important to maintain that safety. And so I just think that I'd like employees to be cognizant of the workplace safety first and foremost.
Yeah. Yeah, we see that a lot too. We have a safety service department. You see a lot of injuries happen to folks early on in start of employment because they weren't properly or adequately trained on the use of equipment or proper lifting and things of that nature. So yeah, safety. We've seen a dramatic decrease in claims in Colorado over the last 3 years, and we like to attribute some of that to very good employers implementing great safety programs.
Which I think is really the most important. It's a training is a huge thing, whether it's safety or cannabis or what have you. So if anything, to all you business owners out there, having some sort of a protocol in place, whether they're sitting correctly or using their keyboards ergonomically correctly or whatever that is, because all that stuff leaves you open. So a little bit of extra few minutes to spend on that safety and that training. Hopefully you put that into your employer manual or your policy manual and take care of that, because it's not just about cannabis, guys. It's about everything else that's out there that is you can get injured very easily. So what I'd like to do is kind of close up a little bit, guys. We had a whole lot of information today, and we're going to continue to get that information over the next few months, the next few years. And so I think it's just really, really the time to begin this conversation. And I am positive this will not be the last conversation that we will have here at the Hispano Chamber about cannabis in the workplace, because it is a frequently asked question, something that we don't have all the answers to. So we're excited about our new FAQ and again, with our partnership with New Mexico Mutual. So what I learned today that I kind of want to summarize, and I would love for you guys to close us up with, something taking us out over what we learned today. But I know that one thing that you guys have talked about the entire hour has been consistency. And that has really been based around creating a really great company policy that you can adhere to and refer back to, so that you don't have to guess at it. It's just, is it policy? Is it in the manual? So it sounds like consistency in creating a policy is number one. Also being very specific with that policy, as specific as you can, and not to be afraid of the word, cannabis, marijuana, whatever you may use as the correct term for yourself, but be okay with it when addressing your employees and putting it in your policy. And then I think the third thing that I'm taking away today is the importance of training. The importance of training that you have with your employees can really make the difference between a claim and not a claim, or a legal battle. So I'd like to turn it over to Dan and Grant for some final words on the way out.
I just want to spend a minute. I think I didn't really address this in my opening comments very clearly. So just a second here, the question of if somebody has a positive drug screen and has a work accident, is that compensable? And in New Mexico, the answer is yes. You'll pay for medical care. The indemnity benefits can be reduced from 10 to 90%, depending upon the degree of contribution of the intoxication to the workplace accident. And it depends on the investigation, which starts with the drug screen. And you can find more information on that in the fact sheet that we talked about earlier. I would echo the talk about safety. There's a lot of technology these days, a lot of resources available to help you with that, from wearable devices to driver monitoring, computerized systems. There's an awful lot of things you can do to improve your workplace safety. I would encourage you to take advantage of those and to provide your employees with the safest workplace you can, and develop a workplace policy and have it vetted by your counsel and apply it consistently. That is your best protection against these issues.
No, I think, I agree with everything Dan said, and echo what Shannon summed up as really the driving points about taking a look at your policy, understanding what your needs are, get that put together, reassembled, or assembled for the first time if that's the case. But at the end of the day, the bulk of your injuries aren't to people who are impaired on drugs or alcohol. They're regular people who just made a mistake, didn't understand what they were supposed to do. 99.9% of all work injuries are to sober people. So, and those are the people we got to figure out how to keep safe, because they somehow find a way to get injured. And so to me, that's really the area of good communication, good training, repetition, responsibility, support of coworkers through those kinds of activities, and recurrence of safety meetings are going to pay you over the long haul.
Well, I have to say that is a reality check right there, Grant. That is a high number, and I think for people that are a little bit hesitant and not sure about cannabis, and I get it, because like I said, I am no expert, so I don't even understand all of this. But what I do know and I do understand is that when you have the overwhelming majority of injuries coming from non-intoxicated employees, that in itself is the most important thing for an employer to take away today from this webinar is a policy, be specific, and train your employees. It is the top 3 things you need to do. So before we leave, I want to let everybody know one final time, we want to thank New Mexico Mutual for the month of May. It has been amazing working with them. We want to thank the team so much, Claudia and team, for everything that you guys have done with us. Monday, we start our new series. It's going to be with Comcast, and we're going to be talking about economic recovery during COVID over the month of June, things that employers and the community will need to know about that. So stay tuned weekly with us on those as well, amongst many other initiatives that begin on Monday and throughout the week, the first week of June. It is a beautiful, beautiful New Mexico weather weekend. I am positive it's just as beautiful in Colorado. And
Absolutely.
So we hope that you guys get out and enjoy, breathe in that beautiful fresh air. And let's get ready to reopen New Mexico. We're very excited to be able to get out and go to restaurants again. And we're excited that you guys have joined us today. So thank you, everybody, so much. Remember, you can find all of this information on our website at www.ahcnm.org. And one more thank you to Dan with New Mexico Mutual and Grant with Pinnacle Assurance. We really, really appreciate you guys being here. Everybody have a wonderful weekend. We'll talk to you next.
Thank you all.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah.